I know that silence. The moment the initial dopamine fades and the reality of a zero-sum chart hits your screen, your brain is screaming that this isn't for you, but it's not wisdom. It's a biological survival mechanism trying to keep you safe in the mediocrity you promised to leave behind. I've witnessed this cycle countless times. The aspiring entrepreneur, let's call him Alex, sitting in a rented co-working space in Austin, Texas, is high on the fumes of potential. He spent 3 weeks in a manic, almost sacred state of creation, mapping out his digital course on high-leverage remote consulting. The planning phase was exhilarating. It felt like labor, but it was merely the gratification of intention. He was rewarded for thinking about building the cathedral, not for laying the foundation stone. The brain, tragically, cannot distinguish between the effort of planning and the effort of execution, especially when anticipation is involved. Then came the launch, the grand unveiling. Alex, expecting the immediate validation that social media has conditioned him to crave, receives only the soft, pathetic whimper of 3 hesitant signups and 0 conversions. The metrics are flatlining, a line so dead it feels mocking. The sudden drop in emotional temperature is palpable. The elegant mental architecture he constructed, the vision of financial autonomy and congruent living, crashes into the hard wall of reality. This is the precise moment where 98% of aspiring architects quit. They mistake the inevitable friction of the system for a divine sign of incompatibility. They look at the failure, not as necessary data, but as a profound personal indictment. They claim burnout, lack of passion, or market saturation. All are elegant lies designed to mask the simple, inconvenient truth. He encountered the first significant wall of pain, and his deep-seated inertia won. This is not a failure of strategy. It is a failure of protocol management. We must understand the enemy, and it is not the competitive landscape or the complexity of SEO. It is the primitive wiring in the deepest cavern of your skull. The amygdala, that vigilant, almond-shaped sentinel nestled within the limbic system, doesn't distinguish between losing $500 on a failed Facebook ad campaign and being chased by a predator across the Pleistocene tundra. Its primary protocol is starkly binary, safe or danger. When you invest significant emotional and financial capital, the 3 weeks of manic creation, the investment in software, the public declaration of intent, and receive a distinctly negative return, the 0 sales, the amygdala registers this as a catastrophic resource depletion coupled with social risk, the potential humiliation of failure. It screams, with the urgency of a pulled fire alarm, flee, retreat to safety. Safety, in this context, is the predictable, low-stakes comfort of your previous existence. It's the neurological urge to return to the known, regardless of how miserable the known truly was. The brain's goal, remember, is not success. The brain's goal is survival through resource conservation. The moment the endeavor demands more effort than the immediate reward justifies, the primitive system mandates immediate withdrawal. The modern world has created a cruel psychological paradox. We are trained by platforms engineered for addiction, Instagram, TikTok, the endless refresh button, to expect immediate gratification. We are given micro-dopamine hits for 0 effort. When we apply this expectation of instant reward to complex, non-linear systems like building a durable business, the resulting crash is inevitable and crippling. The first disappointment isn't just a setback, it is a massive dopamine debt. The brain, having been promised the spectacular reward of freedom and wealth during the visualization phase, violently rejects the sustained, boring effort required to earn it later. This rejection manifests as the sudden, overwhelming loss of passion. You aren't pivoting to a better idea, you are executing the flee protocol under the guise of strategic redirection. I call this phenomenon the dopamine cliff. You launch your product, you wait for the immediate ascent, and when the chart remains stubbornly horizontal, you interpret the lack of immediate lift as proof that the entire cliff face is unclimbable, so you jump off. This is where the wisdom of figures like Viktor Frankl becomes surgically relevant. Success in any significant long-term venture, be it an online business, a complex scientific study, or surviving an atrocity, requires the absolute severing of gratification from action. You must learn to derive meaning and momentum from the process itself, from the intentional suffering of the grind, rather than from the unpredictable external metric of profit. If you are waiting for the motivation to return, you are waiting for a neurochemical event that is contingent upon prior success. It's a vicious loop. The only way out is to deliberately bypass the emotional center and impose a higher cognitive protocol. You must become a ruthless systems operator overriding a flawed operating system. The core flaw in your mental architecture is the expectation of congruence between effort and reward within a short, arbitrary time frame. You believe that because you worked hard for 3 weeks, the market owes you success on day 1. The market, however, is a cold, indifferent machine. It only validates persistence, iteration, and volume of failed attempts. To break the quit cycle, we must implement a neuroscientific countermeasure. We need a period of mandatory, shielded failure. A blindagem against the amygdala's tyranny. The immediate goal is not profit. The immediate goal is the accumulation of 10 documented, analyzed failures. This is the regimen of the 10 errors. This regimen serves 2 critical functions. First, it removes the pressure of success. By actively seeking the first 10 disappointments, you redefine the metric of success. Success is no longer making money. Success is completing the 10th documented failure. This immediately shifts the focus from external validation, dopamine, to internal process compliance, discipline. Second, and more importantly, it deliberately fatigues the amygdala. Every time you encounter a setback, a bad review, a failed ad set, a technical meltdown, and choose to analyze it rather than retreat, you are sending a clear, high-level signal to the primitive brain. This is not a threat to life. The amygdala, like a persistent alarm system, initially screams loud. But if you keep walking past the alarm, if you keep engaging the perceived danger without dying, the system recalibrates. The emotional intensity assigned to failure begins to attenuate. You are teaching your nervous system that disappointment is merely information, not a death sentence. The vast majority of online endeavors fail not because the concept was poor, but because the creator allowed the first 3 data points to activate the primitive flight sequence. They stopped collecting data the moment the data hurt their ego. Your assignment now is to stop agonizing over the 0 on the sales chart and start embracing the complexity of the inevitable mistake. We must build a shielding mechanism against the ego's fragility. This shielding is forged through the systematic documentation of what didn't work. Consider the case of the fictional Alex and his high-leverage remote consulting course. His first failure was assuming that an elegant landing page was sufficient. The amygdala interprets the lack of sales as the entire idea is bad. The mentor Sombrio reinterprets it as the offer articulation on the landing page is suboptimal, failure 1 of 10. The difference is crucial. One leads to quitting, the other leads to the next iteration. This persistence is not about brute force motivation. It is about cognitive discipline. It is about understanding that sustained effort in the face of negative feedback is the only way to generate the neural adaptation necessary for long-term competence. You cannot wait for the feeling of flow to arrive. You must force the system into motion until the flow is induced by momentum. You must activate the inertia sound of success by accumulating small, rigorous, analytical failures. We are not pursuing profit yet. We are pursuing neurological mastery. We are building the tolerance for necessary friction. The profit will only arrive once the system is sufficiently robust to withstand the inevitable consistent blows of the market. Without this neuro-rigor, you will remain perpetually stuck in the cycle of high-energy launches followed by immediate, humiliating retreats. The protocol begins now. Your goal is to identify and document the first error, strip away the emotional narrative, and define the single, smallest variable you will change before attempting the next iteration. The narrative of "I failed" must be surgically replaced with the clinical report, "Variable X was insufficient, requiring adjustment Y." This is how we begin to architect a mind capable of generating sustained success. The surgical replacement of narrative with report is not a pleasant process. It feels cold, sterile, and fundamentally unfair to the effort you invested. Your internal voice, the ego, that fragile curator of self-image, screams for validation. It demands that the universe recognize the hours you spent crafting the course, the late nights fueled by cheap coffee and high hopes. When the market delivers silence instead of sales, the primitive mind interprets this dissonance, this lack of surgery congruence in between expected reward and actual outcome, as a profound personal insult. The amygdala, already primed, translates the zero on the dashboard not as a data point but as a judgment. You are a fraud. Retreat. This is precisely where most individuals fail the phrase protocol. They allow the emotional sting of failure 1 to define the entire venture. The emotional energy, which should have been channeled into analysis, is instead converted into self-loathing and shame, leading to the immediate activation of the flight response. To counteract this, we must weaponize the prefrontal cortex, PFC. The act of rigorous documentation, writing down in clinical detail why the attempt failed, is a sophisticated cognitive maneuver. It forces the limbic system's chaotic, high-energy emotional output to pass through the filtering mechanism of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPFC. The DLPFC, the seat of executive function and logical thought, cannot process raw fear. It requires structured data. When you force yourself to define failure 1 as the offer articulation on the landing page is suboptimal, you are performing a neurological bypass operation. You are taking the raw, primal energy of disappointment and transforming it into specific, actionable information. You are leveraging the highest function of your architecture mental UI to override the lowest, most reactive function. This redirection of energy is the core mechanism of the blindagem, the shielding against the ego's fragility. Alex, our consultant, experienced this internal war after his first documented failure. He wanted to delete the course, block his email, and return to the predictable mediocrity of his old job. But the Wanter protocol mandated that he define the next variable. He meticulously adjusted the headline and the core promise, moving from vague, high-leverage remote consulting to the more specific protocol for 30-day client acquisition using asynchronous communication. He relaunched. The result? Failure 2. This time, the emotional spike was lower, a slight tremor instead of an earthquake. He had mentally braced for it, having already categorized the first attempt as a necessary casualty. He checked the analytics. Sales remained at 0, but now the bounce rate on mobile devices was astronomical. The elegance of his landing page dissolved into an unusable mess on a smartphone screen. The old Alex would have declared, "The market doesn't value my expertise." The new, disciplined Alex documented the clinical report. Failure 2 of 10. Variable X, mobile user experience design, was insufficient. Adjustment Y. Implement responsive design template and test across 3 mobile operating systems. Notice the deliberate shift in language. There is no blame, no judgment, only a technical assessment of a broken component. He treated his business not as an extension of his soul, but as a faulty machine requiring iterative repair. He corrected the mobile experience. Relaunch. Failure 3 was swift and expensive. His polished ad sets targeting high-income executives in the NYC metro area burned through his limited budget in 48 hours, yielding only 5 low-quality leads. The amygdala whispered, "This is proof. You are wasting resources. Stop now." Alex, observing the data through the cold lens of the PAR protocol, ignored the whisper. He recorded, Failure 3 of 10, variable X, targeting and ad creative or cost per acquisition was insufficient. Adjustment Y, broaden targeting to mid-tier managers in secondary markets, Dallas, Atlanta, and iterate 3 low-cost video creatives. This process is not about finding the perfect solution. It is about systematically eliminating the flawed variables. Every documented failure is a necessary subtraction, bringing you closer to the functional equation. This is the creation of inertia. In physics, inertia is the resistance of an object to changes in its state of motion. When you are static, quitting, the initial force required to start is immense, the fear of the first failure. But once you are moving, once you have accumulated 3, 4, or 5 analyzed failures, the momentum itself begins to sustain the effort. The energy required to move from failure 3 to failure 4 is significantly less than the energy required to move from the emotional paralysis of the first disappointment to the cold analysis of failure 1. By forcing the system into motion, you are generating kinetic energy. The brain prefers motion over stasis. The repetition of the analysis loop, failure, documentation, iteration, begins to establish a robust neural pathway. You are literally programming the brain to seek information, the failure analysis, rather than seek safety, the retreat. The initial emotional debt tied to the launch is being paid down, not with success, but with rigorous documented effort. You are proving to your nervous system, through repetition, that disappointment is not a catastrophe. It is merely the cost of tuition. When Alex reached failure 5, a technical glitch where the payment processor failed to integrate correctly, he fixed it with a grim, detached efficiency. There was no existential crisis, only annoyance. The emotional intensity had attenuated exactly as predicted. The amygdala, exhausted by the consistent lack of high-stakes consequences for perceived danger, began to stand down. The emergency alarm was malfunctioning because the resident kept walking past the fire. This is the psychological state we must achieve, a profound indifference to the immediate outcome paired with an obsessive commitment to the why protocol. The only metric of success is compliance with the task. Document the failure, identify the variable, implement the adjustment. The profit motive, that immediate spike of dopamine that initially drives the launch, is a volatile and unreliable fuel. We are replacing it with the enduring, stable fuel of discipline. The quiet, introspective satisfaction of following a rigorous, self-imposed structure. You are cultivating the resilience necessary to withstand the inevitable, constant blows the market will deliver, even once you are successful. The next stage of the beta protocol involves not just documenting the failure, but understanding the precise depth of the market's apathy. We must move beyond technical fixes and address the fundamental misalignment of the offer itself. Alex is halfway through his regimen. He has built the neural tolerance. Now he must build the market. Congruence. The path to congruence demanded a different kind of excavation. Alex had mastered the technical syntax of failure. Now he had to confront the semantic void. Failures 6, 7, and 8 were not about broken code or poorly placed buttons. They were about the profound, crushing indifference of the market. He had fixed the machine, but the machine was built to solve a problem that nobody felt acutely enough to pay for. This is where most practitioners of the protocol falter. The ego can withstand technical criticism. It's easy to blame the ad platform or the server, but it shatters when faced with the realization that its masterpiece is irrelevant. Failure 6 revealed that his complex, sophisticated software solution, designed for streamlining creative workflows, was too verbose. The market didn't want streamlining. It wanted to eliminate a single, specific, irritating task. Alex, deeply invested in the intellectual elegance of his solution, fought the data. His internal monologue, the voice of the wounded ego, argued, "They just don't understand the long-term value." I watched him document this resistance. I saw the shadow of the amygdala trying to creep back, disguised not as fear, but as intellectual superiority. The protocol demands radical honesty. He recorded, failure 6 of 10. Variable X, core offer complexity, value proposition, was insufficient. Adjustment Y, simplify the offer to address one quantifiable pain point, e.g., automate weekly reporting in 5 minutes, and reduce price point by 40%. He shed the complexity like dead skin. Failure 7 was a brutal confirmation. The new simplified offer was still failing because the language used to describe the pain was Alex's language, not the customer's. He had used clinical corporate jargon when the customer spoke in frustrated emotional terms. He was speaking German to an audience fluent only in American slang. He implemented the adjustment, scraping forums and customer complaints for the raw, visceral language of their frustration. He restructured the landing page copy around the words they actually used to curse their problems. Failure 8 hit with a quiet finality. He had solved the technical issues, simplified the offering, and used the correct language. Yet the conversion rate remained lethargic. The data suggested a fatal lack of trust. The market smelled desperation. This brings us to the core mechanism of congruence. The market is not just buying the product, it is buying the stability of the producer. When you launch a business fueled solely by immediate dopamine need, the desperate hope for a quick sale to validate your existence, that volatility broadcasts outward. Your messaging, your pricing, your hurried attempts at customer service all carry the tremor of anxiety. Alex, by enduring 8 documented failures, had achieved a strange, unsettling calm. He no longer needed the sale. His focus was entirely on the iterative process. The energy shifted from, how can I get them to buy, to, what is the next statistically necessary adjustment? This detached focus creates congruence. The market perceives the stability, the lack of hunger, and the quiet authority that comes from an operator who is committed to the long game, irrespective of immediate returns. He was no longer trading on hope. He was trading on verifiable, documented structure. Alex recorded failure 8. Variable X, market trust congruence, was insufficient. Adjustment. Y. Implement 5 long-form, high-value content pieces, free tools, guides, demonstrating expertise and commitment, deferring immediate sales pitch. This was the expenditure of time and expertise not for profit, but for the creation of psychological capital. The market began to interact with the free resources. The leads were slow, but they were high quality, imbued with a nascent sense of respect. Then came failure 9. It was a small failure, almost trivial. A few early adopters complained that the Automate Weekly Reporting feature, while functional, didn't sync correctly with a niche third-party calendar application common in their industry. This was not a system-wide collapse. It was a microscopic misalignment. But Alex, having completed the rigorous training of the first 8 failures, saw it not as a setback, but as the final clue. He realized that his targeting, even after refinement, was still slightly off-center. The customers who truly needed this level of automation were those using that specific niche calendar. He adjusted the targeting one final time, focusing the entirety of his remaining small budget on that hyper-specific ignored niche. He corrected the syncing issue. The system was now structurally sound. The architecture mental, built brick by failure brick, was complete. The initial fear was transmuted into structural discipline. The desperate desire for instant gratification had been replaced by the quiet satisfaction of following the protocol. He relaunched the system. The first sale arrived 3 hours later, followed by another, then 3 more the next day. It wasn't a sudden, explosive success. There was no dramatic dopamine firework display. It was a slow, steady, verifiable flow. The system was generating profit not because of luck or magic, but because Alex had systematically eliminated the 9 most probable variables for failure. The rule of 10 errors is not a guarantee of success on the 10th attempt. It is the mandatory psychological stress test required to build the internal blindagem, shielding. The purpose of the hot protocol is not to yield profit. The profit is merely a fleeting consequence. The purpose is to forge the entrepreneur into a mechanism capable of enduring the inherent volatility of the market. When Alex later scaled his business, reaching revenue milestones that would have terrified the pre-protocol version of himself, new, far larger failures inevitably occurred. Lawsuits, major technical outages, competitive sabotage. But those failures landed on the solid foundation built during those initial 9 documented defeats. The amygdala remained quiet. The response was not retreat, but immediate surgical documentation and iteration. The true failure is not the loss of capital or the collapse of the website. The true failure is the surrender of your architecture mental yuri. to the primal fear of disappointment. Those who quit after the first failure have proven one thing: they are not prepared to pay the tuition required for self-mastery. They remain perpetually trapped in the cycle of high dopamine launches and low-effort retreats. The only way out of the quicksand of instant gratification is to embrace the grim necessity of the struggle. Document the wound. Analyze the variable. Implement the adjustment. Repeat 10 times, or 20, or 50, until the act of persistent analysis becomes the default state of your nervous system. You are not seeking success. You are seeking structural integrity. And only after you have paid the cost of 10 documented failures will your own mind finally grant you the congruence necessary to accept the enduring burden of success. Until then, you are merely a tourist in the landscape of commerce, destined to pack your bags at the first sign of rain. The market demands permanence. Build your shield or prepare to vanish.